God morgon! Ja. Yes. Nu är vi igång. Välkomna denna fredag morgon. Eftersom vi har gäster från även andra kommuner så inleder jag med att presentera mig själv. Hej Hedi, en av 3 rektorer på Ådalsskolan. Mina 2 kollegor sitter där uppe. Och vi är glada över att ha er här även från andra kommuner. Jag vill börja med att informera att föreläsningen filmas och kommer senare att läggas ut på nätet för information. Här föreläsningen sker i samarbete med lokala näringslivet och kommunens näringslivsenhet. Det är de representanterna ni ser här uppe. Vi är oerhört tacksamma och stolta över det samarbete som råder mellan skolan och det lokala näringslivet. Några allmänna frågor igen då. Jag hoppas att vi även denna gång får vår föreläsare att säga fantastiska elever och personal vi har på Ådalsskolan. På grund av den fantastiska ordning som hålls under föreläsningar. Ådalsskolan är känd för att inte förbjuda ny teknik. Mobiltelefoner är på tyst läge, men vi twittrar och facebookar för fullt om det vi håller på med. Efteråt är det som vanligt att när föreläsaren är klar tackar vi av honom och jag säger några avslutande ord innan vi går iväg. Sponsorerna som har hjälpt till med det här som syns här på tavlan ombeds stanna kvar för några pressbilder. Varför vi har denna föreläsning då? Gerver är en fantastisk kraft åt det förändringsarbete som vi håller på med. För en skola och en bättre värld. En av de stora utbildningsfilosoferna i världen och en av Gervers professionella mentorer, Sir Ken Robinson, säger så här. Om alla får chansen att förändra en liten del av sin egen värld kommer vi att förändra den stora världen. Och ni tillhör dem som ska få chansen att förändra en liten del av sin egen värld. Föreläsaren idag har förvandlat en skola med dåligt resultat till en av de mest kreativa och stimulerande inlärningsmiljöerna i världen. 2005 utnämndes han till årets rektor i Storbritannien. Idag arbetar han som föreläsare och har klienter som Google, Microsoft och Royal Bank of Scotland. Han ses på BBC och andra mediekanaler med jämna mellanrum. Jag kommer att övergå till en presentation som han också förstår innan jag släpper in honom. This morning, it is my distinct honor to present one of the greatest speakers on this planet. He's an award-winning former head teacher, inspirational speaker, innovator, and an author. He's also one of our best role models when it comes to leadership and dealing with change. From Madrid, London, Singapore, Las Vegas, to municipality of Kramfors. Please welcome Mr. Richard Gerver.
You know, my mother couldn't have written a better speech about me. That was amazing, wasn't it? The only problem now is I can only let you down. How do you follow that? It's amazing to be here, actually. And it's amazing to be in a room filled, and I'm going to be twitching this morning, because the room is filled with people who are the same age as my daughter. Now, I need to let you know, and the older people in the audience will understand this. I have an 18-year-old daughter. That's why I travel. Now, my 18-year-old daughter, and I wonder if you felt this way about your own parents. My 18-year-old daughter used to think I was a god until she was about 11. She used to think I knew everything. I could do everything. She looked at me in that way that only young children look at their parents, with adoring eyes. You are a god, Father. You are the most incredible man on the planet. My daughter went to bed on the evening before her 13th birthday. And she was brilliant. She still thought I was a god. She woke up the next morning, and I suddenly had become nothing more than dirt on her shoe. She went to bed. Night, Dad, I love you, you're amazing. She woke up the next morning, I want to talk to you. And what really upset me was she started telling me how wonderful some of her teachers were. Now, I need to let you all know there is nothing parents hate more than their children coming home going, I love my teacher. He's amazing. He knows everything. Unlike you, you idiot. Right? Now, my daughter is coming to the end of her time at school, like many of you are. And in truth, and I'm sure those people here that are parents of children the same age will recognize this. It's a really difficult time for a parent because you start to realize that your child is about to leave home. And as a parent, that can be tough because you start to tick off for the last time the things that you'll do together at home. And recently, we had one of those experiences. My wife and I went to my daughter's final parent-teacher consultation evening. Now, I have to tell you that I was actually quite pleased about this, because I find parent-teacher consultation evenings, frankly, boring. And we turned up because, and the reason for that, by the way, is my wife will never let me say anything. Because I used to be a school principal. And the teachers are often very scared of me, and I want to say stuff, and my wife won't let me. And this happened for the last time recently. So we turned up at my daughter's final parent-teacher consultation evening. And we went to see the history teacher. Now, the history teacher is one of these teachers I hate because my daughter loves. I've never met him before, but apparently he is the most perfect man on the planet, according to my daughter. Even more important to her than her own boyfriend. Right? This man is like the new god to my daughter. And I wanted to meet him, frankly, so that I could punch him. So, we turn up to our parent meeting and we sit at the desk opposite the history teacher. And it turns out that he loves my daughter as much as my daughter loves him. Because all he could say was, your daughter is amazing. And I'm thinking, you don't have to live with her. She's amazing. One of the most talented students I've ever taught. I'm thinking, are you sure you're talking about my daughter? She's extraordinarily mature. Her approach to her work is incredible. And then he said, and in particular, her assignments, the tasks she's set to research and write at home. They're so mature, they have so many different viewpoints and perspectives when she produces her essays. They're truly exceptional. Now, at this point, I started to giggle. I'm sat there going, and my wife did something that she's not done in 21 years of marriage, and the young people in the room won't understand this for another 20 years. She did something she's not done in the 21 years we've been married. She held my hand under the table. Now, I know this isn't inappropriate, but because I'm a man of a certain age, I thought it must be my birthday. And we should leave parents' evenings straight away. Of course, because I'm a man of a certain age, I totally misread the situation. And she knew why I was giggling. And it was only as the knuckles on my hand were breaking that I started to realise the signal. You see, I know how my daughter does her assignments. When she gets set her essay, she comes home. She then types into her social networks, Twitter, Facebook, and all the other ones, the essay title. She then goes and makes herself a cup of coffee. And then she comes back to her computer, where 5 minutes later, the thousands of friends she has around the world have answered the question for her. She sits down with her coffee, and she reads through all the answers, and she pulls out the bits that she likes, and she puts them together, and she creates her answer. Now, this really interests me, because people like me travel around the world talking to teachers and experts and professionals of the same generation as me, telling them that we have to change education. And what I realised that evening was that actually it doesn't matter what we decide to do. You've already changed education. Now the interesting point is, what we have to get our heads around is understanding that young people are already changing education and accepting that they must be allowed to show us how the world can now function. You see, that history teacher, if he'd known how my daughter does her assignments, would have changed his opinion about her, because he's quite a traditional teacher. He would have accused her of cheating. I would suggest that she's exhibiting all the characteristics necessary to be a successful citizen, not just in the 21st century, but the 22nd century. You see, people like me still talk about the 21st century as if it's something that's still to happen. Here's an interesting thought for all of you. The advances in medical science mean that children that are being born this year will live in the 22nd century. The children that you're yet to have will be working in the 22nd century. So some of what we've got to stop doing is talking about the 21st century as if it's the future. We need to stop talking about how we're going to create an education system for the future. And just stop and look at how the world functions and think about it slightly differently. You see, one of the great problems with education over the last 20 or 30 years is that policies and systems and strategies have been designed by people of my age and older than me. And what happens is we just keep coming up with endless new policies and new ideas. But they're not actually ideas that can transform the system. They're just ideas and policies that are built on top of what we already do. People like me and Ken Robinson, and he's been doing it longer than me, have been talking for years and years and years and years. But nothing has really changed. Although that's partly what excites me about coming here. Because when I met Payman for the first time, I realised that some of the work going on here was some of the most innovative work I've seen in education anywhere in the world. And I want you to be proud of that. Because you may think you're a small place in the middle of Sweden. But actually, some of what's going on here, some of what you're doing in your schools right now, is some of the most exciting and innovative work I've seen and heard about happening anywhere in the world. So if you do nothing else when you leave here this morning, make sure you leave here as a community with your heads held high and be incredibly proud of what you're achieving. Because over time, the world needs to know about what's happening here. And I'm going to be telling them, by the way. As I travel, I'm going to be telling them. So hopefully you'll start to have visitors from all over the world visiting you, because of me. And if any of you work in the tourist industry in the area, I want 10%. So, we've got to stop looking at silver bullets. We've got to start asking deeper questions. We've got to make sure that we start with a vision. Because one of the real problems with education, when I talk to governments around the world, and I ask them what the purpose of education is, in their country, in their region, in their territory, virtually none of them can tell me. It seems to me that the only vision most Western economies have today is to beat China in the PISA International Academic League tables. I mean, how many other people in here, who's a teacher in here, by the way? Can you just put your hand up if you're a teacher? Doesn't PISA drive you mad? And by the way, it's rubbish, so stop worrying about it, right? You could write a comic book that had more information in it that was valuable to education than PISA. So, yeah, isn't it interesting? Because, and I particularly know it was true in Sweden, after the last PISA report 3 years ago, do you notice that everybody started to hate Finland? Bloody Finland, right? Everyone was going, oh, Finland, best education system in Europe. We all need to go and look at what Finland are doing. And for the Swedes, that must have been like, oh, just shoot me, right? Now, if we're honest with each other, when the new PISA League tables came out at the end of 2013, and Finland had suddenly dropped, and they plummeted, did you see? Just like Manchester United in the Premier League. They were brilliant, now they're rubbish. Trust me, I've seen them this season, right? They are rubbish. And Finland are like Manchester United. We're the best. No, we're not. What happened there? And now all the politicians are going, Finland, no, China! But it's nonsense. It's rubbish. And the problem with it is this. If all you do is you keep putting in short-term measures, you transform nothing. The same thing is true in companies. The companies which have collapsed since the global financial crash in 2008 are companies that kept putting in short-term measures, that kept reacting to problems, rather than sticking to a long-term plan and a long-term vision. I had an amazing opportunity. Well, I've had a couple that I'm going to tell you about this morning. But a few months ago, I had the chance to have lunch with Eric Schmidt. Now, that name might not be recognizable to some of you. Eric Schmidt is the executive chairman of Google. He is quite possibly the most powerful man in technology in the world today. He was hired by the guys that created Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, to turn Google into a business. Because Larry and Sergey were two incredibly talented young men who knew how to program, and they created this vision. The vision was, we're going to create a program that will organize the world's information so that it's easy to understand. Right? But neither of them knew how to make money. So they had this incredible idea and an incredible service, but they had no idea how to make money. So they hired Eric to join Google to become the man who could turn Google into a business. And one would have to say that Eric has done a rather good job. So I had lunch with Eric Schmidt. Don't ask me how, it just happened. In truth, I just stalk these people until they give in. So I had lunch with Eric Schmidt, and I asked him a number of things. Very interesting man. The first thing I asked him was very specifically about education, because I had a question that's been bothering me for many years now, right? And it was this. I said to him, Eric, can you ever see a time where technology will replace teachers? And I kind of expected him to say yes. And it was really amazing, because he took less than a second to give me his answer. He didn't even need to think about it. Immediately he said no. So I looked at him and I said, how can you be so sure? And he said something that I just loved. He said, you need to remember, Richard, that education is about the development of human beings. Human beings are organic. Every one of them is different. Every human being is unique. Every human being has a different interest, a different skill, a different sense of place and value. And education at its heart will always be about the development of those wonderfully unique human beings. And therefore, education at its best is a human experience. And for education to always be at its best, it is always going to be about a series of human interactions. He said technology can support education, but technology can never become education. Now, I thought that was an incredibly powerful thing, don't you? Because that's something I think we must always remember. You know, technology is a wonderful thing, and it has become a way that our children are transforming their lives. But underneath technology is always human interaction. If you go back to my daughter, so she sends people a message telling them what her homework is. She's interacting with human beings. She's using technology to do it, but she's interacting with other human beings all over the world. Those human beings then return that interaction by sharing their knowledge and information. Then she uses her experience and her human presence to read through and sift that information and pull out the things that matter. She could never have done that if she hadn't developed a personality, an opinion, an understanding of other people, of the way other people think, of the way other people behave, understanding what her history teacher was after. Those are human characteristics. And the one thing that I say to people wherever I go around the world is always remember, no matter what you do to seek to transform education, it always has to be about humanity. So then I got on to talking with Eric about other stuff. And in particular, I wanted to know about what it was like to run Google. I mean, you don't get to meet somebody that powerful very often, right? So it's a great question. How do you run Google? I'm thinking to myself, if you can teach me how to do it, I can go and make billions of dollars as well, and I can stop talking to audiences about education. And he said, well, let me tell you, he said, when we started Google, it was the most exciting thing. It was unbelievable, because we were a collection of really young people who had amazing ideas. And we were able to come up with ideas and turn them into products really quickly and really easily, always based around a single vision. He said Google's vision has always been to organize the world's information and make it easy for people to access. And he said there's a second vision that sits underneath that, which is really simple but really powerful, he said. Because the sub-vision at Google is that we must never do evil. Now this is really interesting, because Google do a lot of things the world don't know about. And Eric was telling me, for example, do you remember when the Arab Spring began in 2008, 2009? And Egypt was one of the first countries to revolt. And one of the first things the government did in Egypt at that time was they shut down the internet so that people couldn't send photographs and video and messages to people outside of Egypt to show them what was going on during the revolution. Google had technology available to them that they developed at the cost of billions of dollars that allowed people to still access the internet even though the internet facilities in Egypt had been shut down. So what the world doesn't know is Google then put that technology in place throughout Egypt, and that's why people were still able to get the messages and the photographs and the videos out to the world so that we could all see what was going on. Now the interesting thing is this, he said we had a powerful vision. We kept creating new ideas based on our powerful vision. He said the problem was that as we became more and more successful, the pressure on us to achieve things became harder. And that meant we stopped coming up with our own ideas. Because what then happens when you become successful is you become obsessed with staying successful. And when you want to stay successful, you start to look at what everybody else is doing. He said all of a sudden the people at Google were going, have you seen what Facebook are making? Have you seen what Microsoft are doing? Have you seen what Apple are making? And what we started to do was start to copy other people's ideas because we thought we had to do what they were doing. So we started using all our energies to create stuff other people were doing. He said the really interesting thing about the story of the business of Google is every time we've tried to create something based on somebody else's idea, it's been a total disaster. He said, what my job is now at Google is, despite all of those pressures, is to make sure that our people focus on our vision, on our ideas, and we do the things ourselves, because it's only then that you can truly apply passion that allows you to do remarkable things. So one of the things I often say to people around education, going back to PISA, is stop obsessing with what they're doing in China or what they're doing in Finland. Be more than that. Have the courage to say, this is who we are. This is what we believe in. This is what we're going to achieve. And put your energy and focus into developing those things. Because that's truly how you start a process of continuous and sustained innovation. When you look at the problems in Western education, it's because we keep changing our minds and changing our focus and doing what they're doing, and then we scrap that, and then we do what they're doing. Meanwhile, our children are growing themselves and evolving their own methodologies and their own lifestyles and their own visions and their own values and their own aspirations. And it seems to me, more than ever, those are the very people we keep ignoring. Let me just get this working again. See, I don't speak Swedish, so I've got no idea what I'm doing here. Is there someone here that can get this presentation working for me again? Anybody?
F5.
F5. Thank you.
I don't know.
No, that didn't work. That wasn't working. Somebody just come and put AccuPayment. Come and do that for me. I think you're just sabotaging the Englishman. I think that's what's going on. I think you've just brought an Englishman here to humiliate him, frankly. Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, so let me tell you about my second meeting. So my second meeting was a man who, if you can top Eric Schmidt, I topped Eric Schmidt. Okay? Amazing. It's like playing top trumps. He was famous. Now I met somebody who's mega famous. So a couple of years ago, I gave a speech in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And it was actually quite a tough conference. Because we were in Saudi Arabia, which, as many of you know, have many complex problems. The title of the conference was Empowerment. Now, for those of you that understand a little bit about the politics of Saudi Arabia, this was an interesting concept for a conference title in Saudi, Empowerment. There were 4,000 people at the conference, but only 2,000 of them were allowed in the room with me. The women weren't allowed in the same room. They had to be in a separate room. So you can imagine this was a challenging conference speech to give when you were talking about global empowerment. So I wasn't looking forward to it, to be honest with you. But then I got to meet this guy, who was the other keynote speaker. And he is truly extraordinary. You know, in our lives, you will and you have all met extraordinary people. But in my lifetime, I don't think I've ever met anybody who I can truly say has changed the world. And I got to meet this guy for 5 minutes between our speeches. So imagine how excited I was when I got to the airport and got onto the aeroplane and I found this man sat next to me on the plane. I was like, he was like, and if you ever travel alone on planes, people have certain body language signals they use, which says, don't talk to me. Right? So he got the magazine out of the seat, and he was reading the magazine, and he put the headphones on, which is clearly a clue that says, "Don't talk to me." I ignored him. I'm sat next to a man who changed the world, and I'm going to be sat next to him for 7 hours. I'll tell you what, when we landed in London, you've never seen anyone run off a plane so fast in all your life. He was gone. And so I see about bye. He'd gone. And he said, "Get that lunatic away from me." But he was an extraordinary guy. And just so that you know who he was, the blokes I was sat next to was Steve Wozniak, the man who invented Apple computers. So I'm sat with Steve on a plane. The other Steve, the two of them who created Apple, and I'm sat with Woz. He's an extraordinary man. Extraordinary. And as we're sat talking, the first thing he said to us, because I asked him, I said, "Did you ever know, did you ever have a plan when you were young that you were going to suddenly be the co-founder of Apple?" And he said, "No, to be honest, never." He said, "I never believed I'd do anything, to be honest with you." He said, "I was a geek. I was a real nerd." He said, "When I was a child, I was one of those children who just didn't know how to play with other children." He said, "I was one of those kids that would sit in the back of a room in a classroom and look at other children and wish I knew how to speak and be funny and play." He said, "Every time I tried, it ended in disaster. It usually ended in a fight or argument. I just didn't know how to play with other kids." And he said, "And I guess when I was about 8 or 9 years of age," he said, "when I was about 8 or 9 years of age, I would sit there and I would think to myself, when I grow up, I don't know what I'm going to do or be, but what I know is I want to change the world for people like me." And he said, "I didn't really know how I was going to do that." He said, "But I had experience up to that point in my life which gave me 2 ideas." He said, "One, maybe I could be an engineer." He said, "Because my father was an engineer, and engineers change the world." He said, "The other was to be a teacher." He said, "Because the only time I truly felt like I could fly was in the company of one teacher." He said, "She was amazing. Every time I was with that teacher, she used to make me believe I could do anything." So he said, those were the 2 options. He said, "It won't surprise you to know that when I left education, I chose engineering." He said, "Because frankly, there was more money in engineering. So I chose to work in engineering." He said, "And the rest is kind of history." He said, "We created Apple and stuff." He said, "But I was a very lucky guy because when I left Apple," he said, "I never had to work another day in my life." And he said, "I decided at that point, because I was still a young man, that I should fulfill my second ambition." So he said, "What the world doesn't know about me is for the 7 years after I left Apple," he said, "I worked full-time as a technology teacher in my local state school." Just imagine that for a minute, right? You turn up at school next semester, you're introduced to your new technology teacher, and it's Steve Wozniak. That would be cool. 7 years he spent doing this. So then we got on to talking about education. And I said, "Well, what's your view on education, Steve? What do you think?" I said, "You've been part of building one of the most successful, iconic companies in the world, and you've spent 7 years as a teacher. So what do you reckon?" And he said, "Well, I'll tell you the first thing I know. So the first thing I know is this. The world is obsessed with thinking about what we should teach children." He said, "What you teach children is totally irrelevant." He said, "But I'll tell you what matters most. How you learn." He said, "That's what should be the focus of education. How you learn, and how you become a lifelong learner. But the content of what you teach is almost irrelevant, because what you teach is only relevant in that moment. It's most of it never useful again." interesting thought. So I said, what do you base that opinion on, apart from your experience working in a school? And he said, well, I'll tell you, when Steve and I set up Apple, we had no idea what we were doing. We were just a couple of kids messing about with technology. He said, well, I was messing about with technology. Steve was obsessed with making money. He said, it was a really interesting friendship. He said, naturally, you know, the first thing we ever made together that we sold was, he said, I invented a little machine that allowed you to change the tone of your voice when you spoke through it. And he said, we designed it specifically so that we could make joke phone calls to other people. He said, we sold loads of them. He said, but the thing was, we were right at the heart of Silicon Valley. He said, the thing is, we got to meet incredible people who worked for really big organizations. He said, you know, we would often hang out with people who worked at Hewlett-Packard or Intel, because these were the people who used to hang out in the bars and lived in the areas we lived in. He said, the thing with Steve was, he had this incredible ability to promise people stuff and then get money out of them. He said, we were based, the two of us, in Steve's dad's garage. And I'd be there making stuff with transistors and wires and playing with technology. He said, Steve would come into the garage at the end of a day and he'd say, guess what, boss? I've got us a contract. And he said, I'll never forget the first one. It was terrifying. He said, I've been to see Hewlett-Packard today. And anyway, he said, they're going to give us $150,000. And Voss said, for what? And Jobs said, because we're going to give them this. And Wozniak said, but we haven't invented this yet. And he said, well, don't worry, you've got 72 hours, get on with it. True, right? And he said the thing was that they suddenly found people were throwing money at them, which meant they were going to have to start employing people. And he said that was scary because neither of us had ever employed anyone in our lives. We were both college dropouts. So we'd never run a business. We'd never employed anyone. He said, but Jobs was a genius. He said, and he used to say to me, he said, you know, Voz, if we're going to build this company that they've just decided to call Apple, so if we're going to build this company, we can't make stuff. Because if all we do is make stuff, we'll be dead in 3 years. The company will no longer exist. He said, if Apple is to have a future, we need to invent stuff. We need to give the world products the world doesn't know it needs yet. He said, that's the only way we'll build a long-term business. That was a genius thing for a young man in his early 20s to say, don't you think? The vision was incredible. But that led to a problem. Because what the two of them realized was that meant they couldn't just employ normal people. You see, Silicon Valley at the time was filled with the most brilliant minds in the world, academically. The brightest people in the world were heading to Silicon Valley. The finest math grads, the finest physics grads, the finest electronics and technology grads from all over the world were heading to Silicon Valley. Plus, they had Stanford University, probably the most technologically advanced university in the world at the time, right there in the heart of the valley. So what they realized was, employing clever people was going to be easy. The problem, the challenge, was what did they really need? So one night, the two of them went out for a beer, and they were talking about employment. And they said, we were sat there over a couple of beers, talking about the kind of people we were going to employ. And he said, he said Jobs came up with a mantra. He said Jobs liked mantras. He kept all through his life, he had little sayings for things. He said, and the mantra he came up with that night must have been really powerful, because Apple still use it today when they're looking to recruit new employees. He said, and it's this: at Apple, we will never employ anyone who needs managing. Just think about that for a minute. We will never employ anyone who needs managing. Now, when you think about the culture that most of us are trained to believe through our education system, We're trained to believe that other people will set the problems for us, will then teach us how to solve those problems, and will then examine us on how well we've solved the problem. Now, translate that up to the workplace, and you think about the vast majority of employees. And what they do is they look at managers or leaders in a company, and they think it's their job to solve problems. So the vast majority of employees will sit there and wait to be told what to do and how to do it. And if an employee has a problem, they tend to go to the boss and go, "There's my problem." It's like giving them a present. There it is. It's not my problem anymore. Now it's your problem. And the interesting thing, for those of you sat here who are about to move in to the next stage of your world, remember that if you want to have a successful future, you need to prove to the people you're trying to get work with that you don't need managing. That means you've got to prove that you are solvers of problems. You are the creators of ideas. Because otherwise, you will never succeed. And for those of us who work in education, what we need to do is make sure we create an education system where students are not taught to rely on us to tell them what to do, what to think, and what to know. And for those of us sat in the room who already run businesses and organisations, the great challenge for professional development is to say, how do I develop my people so they don't need managing either? How do I invest in them so that they can start to think for themselves? And when I'm recruiting new employees, how am I going to make sure that I'm employing people who can manage themselves? Because that's how we create organic change, which is what the world needs. The problem with most organisations today is they live in a world where everyone who works in that organisation waits to be told how they're going to change and when they're going to change. Really successful organisations, as we move into the 22nd century, will be more organic than that. They will be continually changing, every minute, every day. And actually, you know you've got it right when the change in an organisation is as unseen as the growth of your own children. Those of us with kids will know what I mean. You know, as you live with your child every day, you don't see them grow. It's only when you look back at photographs you realise how far they've grown. And that's what change should feel like. But it can only feel like that if everyone is actively involved in that process. So I think it's a great mantra. And by the way, it's not just Steve Wozniak and Apple that think that. I'm going to take us back to the organisation that write the PISA reports. Now, the real tragedy about this organisation is that politicians and the media never actually read what's written in the reports that this organisation publish. All they're obsessed with are the data figures about where countries are in the testing order. They produced a report in October, 2 months before the last PISA report, called the Skills Outlook. It was the first time a global organisation had done serious research into the links between skills, employability, and education. And their findings are really, really interesting. It's a 600-page report, but I've pulled out 4 of the headlines that I want to share with you, partly by way of celebration, because of what you already do in your schools, and partly as a challenge to say, so where are you going to take it next? Let me show you the 4 headlines. Number 1, the countries that are finding it hardest to get young people into work are countries which have become overly obsessed with formal qualifications and exam results. Because what happens in those countries is that the education system is designed just to get kids to pass those exams. And what businesses are saying is, that's fine, but when we employ those people, they don't possess the skills we need in our company. Because what has happened is that education has forgotten to teach the life skills that are actually necessary to be a good employee. The second point is this, that 50 years ago, when we were living in an industrial age, the most important skills young people could have coming out of education were the ability to take on an instruction, to take on technical information, to remember it, and to repeat the process over and over again, and do what they were told. That was the perfect model to work in an industry, in an industrial age. But when you talk to big companies now, what they'll tell you is those skills are no longer important. They're not even on the graph any longer. By far, the most important set of skills young people can demonstrate if they want to get good jobs in the workplace are interpersonal skills. The ability to listen, to communicate with one another, to collaborate, to show confidence, to be able to interact with each other, to be able to work with people you don't necessarily get on with, to be able to solve problems, to be creative and to be innovative. Those are the things that will drive us forward into the 22nd century. Those are the most important skills. And added to that, what therefore is really important, and I ask all of you sat here who are still students to think about this, just in your own minds. There are 3 characteristics that really successful people in the 21st century need to exhibit. 1, the ability to keep learning. 2, the ability to constantly adapt to new situations, to new problems, to new challenges. How quickly can you face a problem, adapt to it, and deal with it? And thirdly, linked to that, how able are you to keep changing, to keep developing yourself, to keep thinking about new things, to demonstrate new skills, new behaviours, new abilities? Those are the things that will drive the world into the 22nd century. And by the way, if you think about it, our generation and our parents' generation are bestowing on you, quite possibly, the most dangerous gifts any generation has handed down to the next generation. There are 3 problems at least facing this planet that you are going to have to find the solutions for. They are problems that have been created over the last 50 to 100 years. 1, the environmental crisis. As everyone in this room knows, if the world doesn't shift the way it behaves around the environment, the world will not be able to sustain itself beyond maybe another 100, 200 years in its current form. 2, the economic crisis. The way the world leads its life is not sustainable. It's got nothing to do with the global economic crash. There are now too many people living on the planet for the money that's available. And the way we all lead our lives as consumers who throw stuff away is simply not sustainable. The global economy will never go back to what it was unless we change the way we think and behave. And the third, socio-ethnic crisis around the world. When we look at the continuing growth and divide between social and ethnic groups around the world, each of those problems alone could threaten the future of humanity. Together, it's like a perfect storm. And your generation are going to have to find the solutions to those problems, which means you're going to have to be able to think totally differently to the way that we think. And the final thing, keeps going, come. This is your new laptop, right? I told you technology was a waste of time, didn't I? We don't need this stuff. Take it back to Microsoft. It doesn't work, okay? The final one, rubbish piece of technology. There need to be closer links between business and education. What I'm really proud about, listening to Payman telling me yesterday, was the fact that not only the business people that are here that have sponsored today's event, and thank you by the way, but over 80 business leaders apparently have been into your schools to work with you to see what you do. And that's unique. Because actually the problem for too many years has been that education sits here, business sits here, and neither talk to each other. We've got to be doing more together. There's a brilliant old African proverb that says, it takes a village to raise a child. Sadly, most civilized societies have forgotten that, because most parents think that their job is to drop their children at school when they're about 5 years of age and pick them up when they're 18 years of age, educated. What we need is an entire community approach to the future of education. Schools should not be places where you dump your children, wait for teachers to teach them, and then you collect them. If we're to create a proper, tooled-up generation for the future, what we need are business people, social entrepreneurs, charitable organisations, parents, and everybody else in communities to be actively involved in the education of young people. Schools should be the hubs of learning. They shouldn't be the place you dump kids and allow teachers just to get on with it. All of us need to work closer together. Now I'm running out of time, so I want to finish, if I may, with just one final note. It's amazing. Some of them are asleep. Some people are asleep already. It's unbelievable. People who are asleep are now being nudged. Wake up, we're about to leave. Are we? Great. Other people are going, we've run out of time. God, it seems like hours. And other people are going, he's going to tell one more story? Oh my God. But I am so tough because I've got the microphone, and I don't need that anymore. I've given up on it. So, yeah. And let me tell you a final story. And it's a story that's inspired me for many years about the power of education and why it matters. So a number of years ago, I spent some time in China doing some research into the Chinese education system before it became famous. I think it's because of me, frankly, because I went over there and they changed it. But before it became famous, I went to China to spend some time in the education system. And I have to say, frankly, it's terrifying. Just for those of you that moan about the amount of work you have to do in school, listen to this. Number one, children in secondary and upper secondary education in China have to go to school 6.5 days a week. They get Sunday afternoons off. Number two, up until recently, it was a legal requirement in China that every student had a minimum of 5 hours formal homework every night after school. Number three, the average class size in a Chinese secondary school is 65 children per classroom. Number four, there is never any interaction in a Chinese classroom. The job of a student is to sit in a room like this and just listen to a teacher talk for an hour. The job of students is to remember everything the teachers have said. Not a terribly good environment, right? Now, it gets worse. Because the culture of Chinese schools is this. Children, students, do not speak unless they're invited to do so. And it's even worse. Because in the average secondary school in China, the teacher will walk into the room. The students have to stand up and bow to the teacher. Just think about that next time you're in a lesson later on today. The teachers in the room will be going, oh, I like that idea. That's good. Yeah, we'll do that this afternoon. So the students stand up and they bow to the teacher and they say, and you might want to write this down, teachers, they say, dear teacher, thank you so much for doing us the honour of coming to teach us today. We hope we do you proud, and we will do everything to listen carefully. Listen carefully. Then the teacher talks at them for an hour. At the end of the hour, the students have to stand up again. Or do they? And they bow to the teacher. Dear teacher, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us for the last hour. It has been a privilege. We hope we do you proud by remembering everything you've said. And then the teacher leaves the room. And then the next teacher comes in and the same thing happens again. And I wasn't happy about this, frankly. And one day I visited a school about 2 hours flying time from Shanghai in an industrial town called Hefei. And I went into a class of 16-year-old students who were waiting for their teacher. But in every other classroom I'd ever been in, the students sat in complete silence because there were cameras being monitored by the school principal. So if any child talked while they were waiting for a teacher, they would be punished. Oh, really? Do you know, the worrying thing is, I did tell this story to the current English education minister, and he genuinely thought these were good ideas, right? That's how bad the English education system is at the moment, right? So, but these children in this particular class, they were talking, they were buzzing, they actually seemed quite excited about what was about to happen. And a couple of minutes later, this man walked into the room, their teacher, and he was about 70 years of age, right? And he was hobbling into a little old Chinese man, and he came to the front of the room. And the children didn't stand up, but they did quieten down. And then the teacher stood at the front of the room, and he bowed to the students, and he said, "Dear students, thank you so much for coming to my lesson today. I hope some of what we're about to share will be of interest and value to you." And then he ran what was by Chinese standards a really interactive session. And at the end of it, he did the same thing. He moved to the front of the room and he bowed to the students and he said, "Dear students, thank you so much for coming to my lesson today. I hope what we've shared has been of interest." And then he went and stood by the door. And as each of the 65 students left the room, he shook them by the hand and said, "Thank you." Now this really interested me. So at the end, when they'd all gone, I asked if I could have a word with him. And I said to him, "Tell me about your philosophy, because it's so different to what I've seen in virtually every other Chinese school." And he looked at me with a kind of smile in his eyes. And he said, "Richard, is it not the greatest privilege on earth that when you look at the sea of faces in your classroom," he said, "I think to myself, somewhere in this room could be the person who finds the cure to cancer, could be the person who finds the solution to world peace, could be a musician who composes a piece of music that moves humanity to tears or laughter, could be a sports star who goes on to win an Olympic medal, could be a future prime minister or president, could be a future doctor or nurse or teacher or lawyer." He said, "The amazing thing as I look at that sea of faces is, I don't know which of those young people will be that person, but I know that if I interact with them in the right way, that person could definitely be in this room." So as we finish today, 2 thoughts for you. One to the teachers. When you get back to school later and you're sat with your students, look at their faces and remember that. And 2, if you're one of the students who is going to be sat in one of those classrooms, ask yourself, why could that not be me? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gerver. Alla som vill sitta en timme till, räcker upp en hand. Fantastiskt, tack! Jag ska avsluta med 3 korta punkter. Aldrig någonsin har jag under mina 10 år, snart 10 år inom skolvärlden, träffat en lärare som har kommit och sagt, "Jag orkar inte med den här klassen. De vill för mycket." Använd den här injektionen av inspiration till att utöva elevinflytande. Hjälp läraren att hjälpa er nå målen. Det är enorma utmaningar som väntar. Sättet att få det här att lyfta, det är att bidra, och då kommer ni att se helt andra typer av engagemang från lärarna också. När ni bidrar och vårt samarbete med lokala näringslivet ges bättre förutsättningar för arbete, välmående och försörjning. Ytterligare en fantastisk föreläsningstillfälle. Jag önskar er en fortsatt trevlig fredag. Tack så mycket!